In the year 2000, just before President Cardoso of Brazil was getting ready to step down, he announced for the first time a plan that would seek to title land to ex-slaves. Barbados had done it 20 years prior with the plantation tenantry freehold versus tax. And these are the things that our people take for granted. Now, how many people in here, you reckon among young people, know the circumstances under which tenantry lands have been distributed and why you saw a burgeoning development throughout tenantries came from towards the evening? And you saw houses that were traditionally chapel houses, now wall houses. You see people starting to build from the back and from forward, largely because they didn't necessarily want to get mortgages. And that opportunity has been part of the improvement along with the right to vote and the right to free education. Many of you here may not be aware that the simple act of getting a mortgage prior to 1980 under the Labour Party government was a difficult act in this country. You didn't get it from banks. There were one or two trust companies. And once we created the Housing Revolving Fund, which was then able to finance the Barbados Mortgage Finance Corporation, now a subsidiary of the Barbados National Bank, people could get mortgages. How many of you in here knew that before 1998, there was nothing called a 100% mortgage? So that if you wanted to go and buy a house, a property, you would have to go and buy it by financing the first 10% yourself. So if the property was 200,000, you had to have 20,000 put down. If it was 100,000, you had to have 10,000 put down. Now, I'm going through these things because it struck me in talking to a number of you that the process of understanding the history of this party and the development of policy has not been top of mind for many of you. And it is critical that you understand what has been regained. Some of you might have heard that Guyana built a deepwater harbor. Can you imagine living in a Barbados without the ability to be able to have trade? Virtually everything that we have is imported. Can you imagine living in a Barbados, northern Switzerland, where we were not having 600 to 700 cruise ships, 600 to 700,000 visitors a year? Because you don't have a port facility, as is the case with a number of Caribbean islands who in recent decades had to build up those facilities to accommodate the cruise ship passengers. Can you imagine going to school and being put out before you were 16? Cynthia Ford was a teacher when in 1976, 14-year-olds were put out of school in this country. How many people in here knew that? And it took Louis Charles and Tom Adams and the Barbados Labour Party government to pass the Education Act to guarantee children in Barbados the right to an education up to 16 years old in schools in this country. Now, I give you a few of those things to whet your appetite, because I have a task for you. And your task is to be able to help build the website of the Barbados Labour Party, to be able to use it as an educational and reference tool, not just as a political tool, but for people who are studying, for people who are doing research. There has to be a place where information can be readily available about the development of your country. How many of you saw the movie Invictus? How many of you read the book? I know reading the book. And the core of the book is really about what? The core of the book is about the struggle of Mandela and the ANC in South Africa. When I was a student in London, everything was about South Africa and the movement in 1983 because nobody knew when black people would have the right to vote. Every night we would see scenes from South Africa with young people in their teens literally taking the fight to the apartheid regime. And for those of us who grew up around that time, it caused us to appreciate more what had been given to us in Barbados without the right to fight. I heard your many plans for this year, but to me you would be doing a disservice if you did not seek to start, as Akil has said, a debating competition that focuses around the value of the right to vote, which is 50 years old in this country. The bill was debated in 1950, the right to vote was excised in 1951, right, Herbie? And if you were to allow the 28,000 school children in Barbados and the 7,000 or 8,000 people at tertiary institutions not to focus and appreciate on what that has meant and what are the implications for it today, because the right to vote was simply one step in the democratic process. The right to participate is evolving. And it evolves even more in the context of the technology which we have now. The amount of comments that I read from many of you on Facebook on socialist views, that is participating in your democracy. That is having your voice heard. Those who call in on the call-in program, that is participating in your democracy. And I dare say that the structure of our parliament and our cabinet has to be improved to allow those voices to be more readily heard in the context of the official decision-making body of our country. Now some people may say this is not sexy. They're absolutely right. But you couldn't do it. You couldn't go and do it in other countries. In Thailand today, in Iran today, what happened in Iran last year in the absence of a free and fair election? How many of you remember the sight of the young lady on the street who was killed, who became the poster child for the movement of dissension against the regime? And I say to you that there is more than one way to take away the rights of the people. Barbados has been fortunate. We have had a stable economy and a stable democracy. In the 44 years since independence, we have only ever not been able to pay our bills 3 years, individual years. In other words, we have only spent more on a month-to-month basis than we earned for 3 particular years. If you were an economist, Ross, you would tell me that we have only ever run a fiscal current account deficit on 3 separate occasions. In the oil crisis, 73-74, in the early 80s, 80-81, and then again in the 1990s early period crisis. But guess what? For the last 2 years, this country has run a current account deficit and is heading for its 3rd year. We are now and in those previous years, the deficits were all 10 million, 20 million, marginal. We are now running a current account deficit of hundreds of millions of dollars. So that what we have to spend to pay public service, what we have to spend to provide services, what we have to spend in terms of the day-to-day functioning of government is far in excess of what we are earning as revenue. Now what is that going to mean? It's going to mean that everything is likely to be put on the table for review by the government. And many of the things that you and all of us have gotten accustomed to will have to be revisited. You heard the government earlier this year talk about a wage freeze. You have heard discussions from different quarters about healthcare and education. And the inability to manage your affairs well means that the future that you will have in this country is going to be constrained and in a different light from what has happened thus far. Now, the truth is that whatever party faces the circumstances will have difficult decisions to make. But those decisions must be anchored in the values of us as a people and what is important to us as a people. And I dare say that education is the bedrock of empowerment in this country and has been. Any mechanism that will therefore look at the review of the terms and conditions under which services are accessed in this country must be the subject of a full national debate in Barbados. And those of you who stand most to be affected because you are young in years have a primary responsibility to be at the head of the discussion in relation to what are the changes that will take place in terms of the structure of government and the services that